Okay, well, I haven't had any easy answers yet. I have removed everything but the mirror and its bracket. I've removed its sprung load bracket so that it's not under much tension. Removed the bracket that stops it from pushing down into the body, so the mirror is folded flat back into the body. And I'm going to try a tiny drill bit and see if I can make any progress on that little shaft. And what I'm hoping is that the drill bit will bite into it and I can lift it out. There's certainly no danger I want to drill right through it. It's not very long, but it's going to be rotating in the socket, I believe. I'll let you know if I have any success. Well, I did have some success finally. And what happened was this. I used my drill bit and it did bite into that little end of the shaft. I put some solvent down there, pushed the drill bit on and turned it, and I could see that the part was starting to rotate. And when the part had rotated a few times, and it's just sitting here, it's just a tiny speck of stuff, I'll just find it, and that's it, that's it. It's that little stub there, about 1 millimetre long, just a bit less than that in diameter. But basically what I did was, when I was happy that it was rotating and it was free and it was surrounded by solvent, was I just bashed the body repeatedly on the top of the table, and just the inertia of that tiny little slug was enough to pop it out of its socket. So now I can reassemble that part of the body. If I hadn't been able to get that out of there, then the camera would effectively been pretty much a write-off, unfortunately. Now there's another spring here that's not being held down. It's held down by a bracket that I've removed. That's why there's very little tension on this at the moment. The mirror's normally got much more spring tension than that. So I've got the camera apart. I think I'll be able to repair it. Well, it's about an hour later now. It's taken me that long to reassemble all the mirror components, but everything's back in place again. I could see from one of the scarred up screws down here that someone had been in here previously. I hadn't noticed that earlier, and I don't really know what that means for me. Whether that means that the failed camera, that somebody had a go at repairing it and then given up. And that would explain a number of features, including why the front rings were out of position. And possibly the meter cord too, which was also out of position. So certainly somebody had been in here, and perhaps they'd been in quite deep. But certainly one of the screws down here was quite scarred up. It's lost a lot of its paint. And that can only have come from somebody wanting to undo that screw. It is awkward to get at. You need a long screwdriver with a long shaft to get under here to get to it. I had to remove this little baffle just so I had more working space to get in here and get all these components back in place. But I've succeeded with that. So now I'm back where we were before I had to dismantle all that stuff to get that tiny little piece of metal out of there. There it is. And from here on in, it should be a fairly simple repair, although with a retina reflex you should never say that. It's really tempting fate. I'll show you later when I've got it up to a decent state again. Well, as you can see, I've reassembled the camera. The shutter I had to strip and service. The only main part I've had to change is that transfer shaft cam here, which had the broken tooth and the end of the shaft was snapped off. Apart from that, I didn't have to replace anything else yet, and the camera works well. The meter cord has all been put back into position. All the drum at the base of the camera and the drum at the top are sitting in the correct position there for B and f1.9, and that's all working correctly now. So this had certainly been mucked up. I've got an idea what happened to it, and I'll explain that to you shortly. But the main thing to note now is that the camera does work again, and although it'll never be a beauty queen, I'm sure once I've got the leatherettes back on the front and the base and reassembled the top of the camera and had a go at cleaning up that chrome top, it'll be a good useful camera again. So I'll come back with an explanation for what I found shortly. Alright, so I've had time to think about this camera, about the way it presented, the problems that it had, and I always like to look for a reason behind these things, see if I can figure out what went on. And I sort of came up with this. Now, first of all, I can list the things that we noticed were broken or damaged or just not incorrect. Now the transfer shaft, that cam there, that obviously was broken, and that was the only real physical damage, I would say. The exposure meter drum, now as I said earlier, that cord had been disturbed from the position where it was normally locked in with lacquer, and it was incorrectly timed to the rings at the front here, so that the meter could never have been accurate basically. And there's every danger if you move the position of this beyond a certain point on that cord, you'll get to a stage where you can't actually move your rings round the full distance they should move, just because you run out of string at one end or another. So that was certainly a problem. There was a damaged screw head inside. It was a black finish screw, and the head was damaged, like somebody slipped off it with a screwdriver. Now there was the broken screw holding the cover on the tripod socket, the back catch cover. That was a bit of a mystery. And there were loose leatherettes. Now really, it was the base leatherette that caught my attention, because that was just flapping loose. That was only held down by having the film advance lever at this end and the surround for the tripod back release catch at the other end, otherwise it would have just fallen off completely. The front leatherettes were loose, they were easy to remove, but they showed no signs that they'd ever been completely removed before and glued back. So what else did we have? Oh yes, this thing, this little tab down here, that opens up the aperture on your lens to maximum when you cock the shutter to allow you to view the image in the finder. And in this case, this tab was right down at the bottom of the scale, up against the stop. Now it should only be at that position down there if the shutter's cocked, and I had assumed that the shutter was cocked but was failing to release. But in practice that wasn't the case at all. So watch this little tab as it moves here as I cock this. See, it moves down that slot there. And it was jammed at this end in its travel. Now, I know from painful experience that damage to the shutter cocking rack and or the transfer shaft, the gears at either end of it, can occur if the timing of the shutter to the body is incorrect. Basically, anything with teeth on it normally has a position. One end of it needs to be connected in a certain position with another. So if that timing's out, something's going to come adrift. And basically that's what happens. Now if you have the shutter too far advanced relative to the film advance, what happens is as the film advance comes round, it can't complete its stroke because the shutter cocking is already up at the end of its travel. And what we had in this case was something a little bit different. This tab here is connected to a geared ring coupled to the whole mechanism. It was incorrectly positioned, so instead of being at this position, it was at this position. It had nowhere to go. So when you went to advance the film, there was nowhere for that gear to go. It was already hard up against a stop. Now at that point, I believe that someone forced the film advance, and that's what broke the transfer shaft gear teeth, and basically that crippled the camera. So, how did all this happen? Well, we know certain things. We know that the meter coupling cord was out of time between the rings at the front and the drum at the top where it connects to the meter. And the simplest way to bugger that up is to remove these 3 screws and lift these front rings off the camera and then fail to put them back in the same position. And I believe that's what's happened. I believe at that stage the person probably realised they had a little problem with their meter, and so that they tried all manner of desperate moves to move the relative positions of the drum at the top here by unhooking that cable and the drum at the bottom, and tried to get back to where they should have been when they failed miserably. During all this stuff, all this attempt to play with the meter, that's when I believe they got this ring in the incorrect position when they reassembled it. And then I think when they went to test it, they simply forced the film advance, broke the camera, and then it was finished basically. After that, they just reassembled what they'd had. They didn't bother to glue the leatherette on the bottom. I don't believe they ever had the front open. The shutter itself certainly had never been serviced, and it did need it. And so that was the condition it was when it came to me. But basically we have a working camera again now. Even the delay timer works. So I'll continue on with this. I've got other work to do on it because I've got to clean up the finder assembly and check that the meter's good, get the prism and finder assembly back on the body, put our leatherettes back and close it up. But I thought for a while there this camera was written off when I couldn't get that little stub out from the end of the transfer shaft. It's lucky, it's all come back from the dead. Well, I've finished closing up the camera. Even that chrome top cleaned up fairly well. So it might have looked like dog tucker yesterday, but today it just looks like a good, useful, classic camera. Everything's go again. Only 2 parts replaced. One was one of these screws and the other was that transfer shaft cam. And that's another Retina Reflex 3 ready for a new home.